Welcome to Face the State. I'm Arianna Bennett. Thank you for joining us. If you pay attention to the bills going through the state legislature, you'll hear the name of my topic for this show referenced quite a bit. The Guinn Center is a research organization like many others, but unlike the others, it is nonpartisan and focused entirely on Nevada. So Jill Tolles, Executive Director of the Guinn Center, is here with me to talk about that. Jill, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's great to have you. And you know all about the interplay between the legislature and the research the Guinn Center does because you were a legislator yourself.
That's exactly right. So the Guinn Center, for those who aren't familiar, is a statewide nonpartisan policy research center. We are affiliated with the University of Nevada, but we also have partnerships with UNLV and Boyd School of Law, and then subject matter experts from across the state. And we study education, economic and fiscal policy, health and social policy, governance and elections, and a little bit of natural resources and land. So basically everything. And you're right, I first became familiar with the Guinn Center when I was an assemblywoman, and I looked to the Guinn Center for good factual, data-driven, evidence-based research. It helped me, their reports would help me to formulate my questions in a hearing, help dig into an issue a little bit more deeply, and at times help inform what legislation I might have brought forward or how I would decide on issues.
Yeah, and I think, it's something that you see quite a bit in the legislature. Journalists use the information quite a bit. It's rare to have a resource like this that is nonpartisan, truly nonpartisan. Tell me how that piece of it came about.
So a little over 10 years ago, we had state and community leaders that looked around and thought, essentially our state is getting more complex. The challenges that we're facing and the need for good factual information to make better decisions, it was just increasingly crucial. And so you have a lot of national interests, you've got a lot of partisan interests, special interests, and maybe some topic specific good research centers that are dive deeply into one area or another, but not a statewide, broad, data-driven, evidence-based policy research center. And so they came together, and what I love about the origin story is that Tom Gallagher, who was a very prominent Democrat at the time, was the one who recommended that it be named after Governor Kenny Guinn, a Republican governor. And I think that really speaks to the heart of the genesis of this organization, that truly is nonpartisan, looking at the facts, and dedicated to that mission.
So how do you keep what you do nonpartisan, keep the bias out of it?
We are vigilant about who we hire and looking at their background, even social media posts. And it's not that people can't have their own personal opinions, but they have to have that passion for data-driven, evidence-based, nonpartisan. But beyond that, we also are vigilant about getting peer review from a variety of expertise and perspectives in order to make sure that we're keeping it in balance. Because sometimes it's about the topics you choose, it's about the questions you ask, and then also the information that you include in your reports. And I'm really proud of the fact that, at least as far as we've been tracking it in the legislative session, we've heard from as many Democrats as Republicans who are looking to our research, quoting our research, and supporting the work that we do. And I think that that shows that we're hitting the mark.
Yeah. How are you funded?
Great question. So we're a nonprofit, and we do not receive direct state funding, but we do receive about 50% of our revenue comes from state contracts or federal grant funded dollars. And then the other half just comes from philanthropy that believes in the importance of nonpartisan policy research in the state.
It's so important. And it covers so many different areas that people really, really care about. And we're going to touch on a few of those. The first of which is this idea of effective lawmaking that you talked about in the Gallagher Dialogues this year. And I'm really interested, I couldn't attend, sadly, it was during news time, because I love that at the beginning of the legislative session you were like, here's how you be better at your jobs. So tell me what were the main takeaways from those dialogues?
So once a year we have an annual event called the Gallagher Dialogues. We pivot between North and South where we hold it. This year we held it at the Nevada Museum of Art, beautiful venue. And we brought in national experts from the Center for Effective Lawmaking. They're out of Vanderbilt and the University of Virginia, and they've been studying effective lawmakers going back 40 years in Congress, and they're now looking at state legislatures. And they've looked at 11 states, Nevada's one of them, and they looked back at who are effective lawmakers going back the last 30 years. And they look for just how many bills they propose, how many of those successfully make their way through the process. But then they take it a step further and ask what's commemorative, just naming a park, and what's substantive, and then the gold standard, what's substantive and significant. So it actually makes a substantive change, and it makes a significant difference in the long run. And what they found is that effective lawmakers really tap into their personal backgrounds and expertise. So it would make sense that if you're a doctor, that you'd know some things about the medical field, right? Or a lifelong educator. Also, the legislators that really tap into the needs of their constituents in their districts and aren't just relying on, partisan agendas or national agendas, but really tapping into real people in their districts. They maintain their heart of why they're doing it, and they bring forward better legislation because it's got a human connection. And then just the ability to be entrepreneurial, working your way through that complex process, building broad coalitions and being willing to compromise. And so it was really fun to look back in my bathrobe on a Saturday morning with a cup of coffee and going through 1,000 lines of data showing effective lawmakers in Nevada and who's been good at it, and seeing some familiar names on both sides of the aisle who have done great things in our state. And I think sometimes we're so focused on how divided we are, we lose sight of the fact that we really do have good public servants in office on both sides of the aisle. And the majority of legislation is actually still getting passed in a bipartisan manner.
Yeah, I think that it's hard to know that without being there and seeing the sausage get made, which most people don't ever do or have the opportunity to do. I think that you're right. There is a good mix of people who really do want to make good change.
Yeah.
And
you
people,
referenced some of this. Sorry, you referenced some of the things that I talked about when I left office, of just some of the lessons learned. And one of the number one was there's noisemakers and there's lawmakers.
Yeah.
Be a lawmaker. And it's true. There's noisemakers, and we tend to focus on them, and they tend to be the ones that are the most divisive. But the reality is there are good public servants on both sides of the aisle that are lawmakers, and they're doing their job.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so then effective lawmaking, one topic that you selected for this. How do you go about picking topics to study?
Sure, so that's actually more of a dialogue, which is an invitation to the community to come in and explore new topics. It's not necessarily policy research. What we do in our entirety, in our research side of the house, is we dive into everything from a landscape analysis of where does Nevada stand, where are the gaps, what are some great options from other states that have done it well that we might consider here, or what are some examples within our states that we can replicate across all the jurisdictions. And so the way that we pick our topics is very thoughtful. We do a state survey, we reach out to the legislature, we reach out to the governor, we reach out to a team of advisors from a lot of different backgrounds, and then we watch what the topics are in the legislature, what are some of the key issues, and then put that all together, and we match it with the experts that we have on our team, either in-house or the academic and subject matter expert partners that we have. And then, obviously, if there's some grant funding or a contract at the state, that enables us to have data sharing agreements where we can get information in a more accessible way to be able to dive deeper. But we also do what we call blue sky research, which is about half of our work that's philanthropically funded, that doesn't have to have a grant attached to it, that we just see a pressing need. We have experts that can come to the table and analyze it, and where appropriate, we may make evidence-based recommendations.
Yeah. Speaking of the zeitgeist, one of those things that you looked at that is pretty top of mind for a lot of people working on their budgets right now is the federal funding piece of all the budgets. And I know the state legislature is struggling with this, local legislature, or local bodies are dealing with this in terms of balancing their budgets and not being sure where their federal funding is going to be cut. You looked into where the funding goes from the federal government as a help for all this.
So one of the things that I love is our research is open and free to the public, and we are passionate about making sure that it's available not just to the 63 plus one, the 63 legislators and the governor in the legislative session, but also to citizens, because knowledge is power, and we want to make sure that we're an informed citizenry. And so there's been a lot of talk about potential cuts, and we've seen some at the federal level that are impacting the state. And so we looked into how much of Nevada's state budget relies on federal dollars. And it turns out it's 27.7% of our budget is relying on federal funds. So then the next question is, well, where does that go? And so we looked at the top 5 budget categories that rely on those federal funds. The vast majority of that is health and human services, 80%. And with 1 in 4 Nevadans, adults and children, on Medicaid, that's a significant portion. And then we looked at education, transportation, agriculture, and then the Department of Education, Training, and Rehabilitation. And so we then broke it down further to see every dollar that is going through the state to those programs, and for every citizen to be able to look, because there's a lot of questions around, is there waste, fraud, and abuse? And transparency is one of the best ways to look at where do those dollars go. And there are some COVID programs that probably are ready to expire, but if anyone looks at it, guinncenter.org, hopefully they look it up, you can see that a lot of it is, nutrition programs, infant and maternal health, it's transportation and infrastructure, it's some education, a significant amount of education, and training and rehabilitation for individuals with disabilities, communicable diseases. So it's helpful to see where those programs go.
Yeah, helpful to see, and also I think becomes a sticky situation when you're in charge of the state budget and you're looking at, if we have cuts in these areas, what are we going to do to fulfill this need that still exists? Right. So if we lose Medicaid funding from the federal government, what do we as a state do to respond here? Right. And I think that's going to be a question we're going to be hearing a lot.
Yep, I think so too.
Now, in advance of knowing what the federal government is going to do, you put this out as kind of a guide. Are you putting out recommendations?
Not on this one yet. We're just really providing it as an informational tool, and we'll, if the time comes and there's the ability to gather some good evidence-based recommendations of how other states might be approaching it, or what we've done historically when we found ourselves in a shortfall for whatever reason. And I can relate to this because I served in the money committees during COVID, and it was a painful period to go in during a not so special session and to have to cut programs. But there are things that can be done to find efficiencies, and so likely we have an amazing team. We have a former senior LCB, Legislative Council Bureau fiscal staff, who works with us, consults with us on economic and fiscal policy. We work with the economics department at the University of Nevada, Reno, and a tax expert there. So there's lots of ways to dive into what have we historically done, and when we face these kinds of shortfalls, and what are some tools and techniques, and then what are some considerations for our state leaders in regards to how do you grow versus how do you cut.
Yeah, a whole lot of brain power over there. All right, Jill, sit tight. Coming up on Face the State, we'll be back to talk about more of the research the Guinn Center has done recently, including a study on housing. It's really interesting. Stay with us.